The first shot barely made a sound. A crash cart slammed to the floor, and the entire emergency room froze. 23 people stopped breathing at once. The man holding the gun wasn't angry. He was calm. Nobody moves. Nobody's a hero. We're here for one person. In the back of the ER, a night nurse named Gianna Ricci set down her syringe. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing slowed, because 8 years earlier, she'd trained for rooms exactly like this, and she hadn't forgotten a thing. The Memphis night shift started the way it always started, with coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the Clinton administration, and a whiteboard full of names that told the story of a city that couldn't stop hurting itself. Gianna Ricci stood at the nurse's station at 7:14 p.m., her dark hair pulled back in the same low bun she'd worn every shift for 4 years, scanning the board with deep-set brown eyes that moved the way a surveillance camera moves systematic, missing nothing. Bed 4. Chest pain. Awaiting troponin. Bed 7. Elderly fall. Possible hip fracture. Bed 11. Pediatric asthma. Mom crying harder than the kid. Bed 14. GSW to the thigh. Handcuffed to the gurney. Police officer scrolling his phone outside the curtain. Standard Wednesday in Memphis. Ricci, you want the GSW or the chest pain? Dr. Raymond Okonkwo didn't look up from his chart. He didn't need to. After 3 years of shared night shifts, they had a rhythm that didn't require eye contact. The Nigerian-born physician had worked this ER for 15 years, long enough to have seen everything twice, and he'd told his wife once that Gianna Ricci was the best nurse he'd ever worked with. He just couldn't explain why. "I'll take the GSW," Gianna said. She always took the GSWs. "Shocking," said Keisha Moore from across the station, not looking up from the IV bag she was spiking. At 26, Keisha was 2 years into her nursing career and 3 months into night shift, and she hadn't yet figured out whether Gianna Ricci was the best mentor she'd ever had or the most intimidating person she'd ever met. The answer, she would eventually learn, was both. Gianna moved toward bed 14 with that particular walk of hers, efficient, unhurried, somehow covering ground faster than people who were actually rushing. The security guard on rounds, Officer Marcus Webb, 58 years old, retired Memphis PD, watched her pass and felt what he always felt. A strange sense of professional recognition, like seeing a fellow cop in civilian clothes. He'd never been able to pin it down. "Hey, Marcus," Gianna said without slowing. "Hey, G. Busy night?" "Not yet." She said that every shift. Marcus would later wonder if she'd known something even then. Behind curtain 14, a 22-year-old named Terrence was trying very hard not to cry. The GSW was through and through, muscle damage only, and he wasn't handcuffed because he was dangerous. He was handcuffed because he'd been standing on the wrong corner when someone else's argument turned into gunfire. He was a sophomore at the University of Memphis. He was studying education. Gianna pulled on her gloves and checked his wound with hands that were paradoxically delicate, small, precise. The kind of hands that could thread an IV into a collapsed vein on a moving ambulance or, in another life, field strip a Sig Sauer P320 in 11 seconds. She didn't mention the second thing. "Am I going to lose my leg?" Terrence whispered. "Not even close. You're going to be sore for a while, and your spring semester's going to involve crutches, but you'll walk out of here." She paused, checking the dressing. "Education major?" He blinked. "How'd you know?" She pointed to the textbook poking out of his backpack on the chair. "Introduction to Urban Education Policy. That's a good field. Memphis needs teachers." His eyes welled up, not from pain, from the fact that someone in this ER had seen him as a student, not a statistic. Gianna finished her assessment, documented her findings, and moved on. She did not think about the cargo container. She did not think about the 43 people she'd found inside it in the Gulf of Mexico 6 years ago, 7 of them already dead, their names tattooed on her memory like scars. She did not think about the 11 hours she'd spent providing emergency medicine on a ship that smelled like death and diesel fuel and the particular saltwater stench of human suffering. She thought about the chest pain in bed 4 and whether the troponin results were back yet. This was the deal she'd made with herself when she'd left the Coast Guard. The past stayed in the past. The Maritime Security Response Team, the breaching charges, the drug submarines, the call signs she'd earned, and buried all of it stayed locked in a box in the back of her mind, sealed tighter than any cargo container she'd ever cracked open. Some nights, the box rattled. Tonight, at 11:43 p.m., the box would blow wide open. But at 7:14 p.m., Gianna Ricci was just a night nurse in Memphis, doing the only thing she'd ever been truly good at, keeping people alive in places where the world was trying very hard to kill them. She refilled her coffee. It still tasted terrible. Some things, not even special ops training could fix. The call came in at 11:38 p.m. EMS, Priority 1. Single gunshot wound to the chest. Male, 28. Vitals crashing. ETA, 4 minutes. 4 minutes was a lifetime in an ER and an eternity when you were bleeding out in the back of an ambulance. Gianna was already moving before the radio finished squawking, pulling the trauma bay door open, barking supply lists to Keisha, who was learning to translate Gianna's quiet voice into urgent action. Bay 2. Set up for a chest tube. Get Oneg on standby. Page Dr. Okonkwo. He's already here, Keisha said, and he was Ray Okonkwo emerging from the attending lounge with the focused energy of a man who'd run this drill 1,000 times. He glanced at Gianna. She glanced back. No words necessary. The ambulance doors crashed open at 11:42 p.m., and the paramedics rolled in a man who was drowning in his own blood. His name was Darnell Watkins, but they didn't know that yet. What they knew was that the bullet had entered 2 inches below his left clavicle, and that his lung was collapsing, and that the tattoo on his right forearm, a set of scales, the kind Lady Justice holds, was already going pale from blood loss. They transferred him to the table. Gianna worked the IV while Okonkwo assessed the wound. Keisha cut away clothing. The choreography of trauma medicine, brutal and beautiful in equal measure. Then Darnell's hand shot out and seized Gianna's wrist. His grip was iron. His eyes were wide. But the look in them wasn't fear of dying, it was fear of something worse. "They're coming for me," he said, each word bubbling with blood. "You need to clear this floor." Gianna had heard panicked patients before. She'd heard men who'd been shot swear they saw angels, swear they saw demons, swear the whole world was ending. She'd learned to filter it, to focus on the medicine, and let the paranoia burn itself out. But something in Darnell Watkins' voice was different. Something in his specificity, not "they're after me, but they're coming for me, and not help me, but clear this floor," triggered a part of her brain that hadn't been active in 6 years. The part that assessed threats. The part that calculated fields of fire and choke points and exit routes. She looked at his eyes and saw what she'd seen in the eyes of every informant she'd ever extracted from a compromised vessel. A man who knew exactly who was hunting him and exactly what would happen when they arrived. "Who's coming?" she asked. Quiet. Professional. The question of a nurse triaging a patient's mental state, or the question of an operator gathering intel. Doesn't matter. They'll kill everyone in here to get to me. His grip tightened. "Please." Then his eyes rolled back and his vitals dropped, and there was no more time for questions because the chest tube needed to go in now, right now. And Gianna's hands, those small, precise, deceptively delicate hands, moved with the speed and certainty of someone who'd performed this procedure in conditions far worse than a level I trauma center. 12 minutes later, Darnell Watkins was stabilized enough for surgery and was being wheeled to the OR on the 3rd floor. Gianna watched the elevator doors close on him and felt something she hadn't felt in years. A warning, crawling up the back of her neck like a spider made of ice. She looked at the ER. 23 patients, 14 staff, 2 exits, plus emergency corridors, security cameras in the corners. Officer Webb making his rounds near the ambulance bay. She was counting exits before she counted patients again. "Stop it," she told herself. "You're a nurse. This is a hospital, not a cargo ship." At 11:54 p.m., 4 men walked through the emergency department's front entrance. They weren't injured. They weren't visiting anyone. They moved in pairs, 2 through the main doors, 2 through the ambulance bay, and they positioned themselves at the exits with the smooth precision of people who had rehearsed this. They wore ordinary clothes, jackets despite the 80-degree Memphis night, and they had the flat, unhurried expression of men who were at work. Gianna saw them before anyone else did. Of course she did. She'd spent 8 years learning to read the body language of armed men on hostile vessels, and these 4 men were speaking a language she understood perfectly. Tactical positioning, concealed carry, controlled entry. Her body reacted before her mind caught up. Her breathing slowed, her posture shifted imperceptibly, unconsciously from the open stance of a nurse to the coiled readiness of something else entirely. The lead man, 40s, dark hair, military bearing, a face that had been places where faces learned to stop expressing emotion, made eye contact with Officer Marcus Webb. He shook his head. Slowly, meaningfully, Webb reached for his radio. Before his thumb found the transmit button, the second man was behind him, and the taser discharged with a sound like tearing silk. And Marcus Webb, 30 years Memphis PD, never once dropped in the field, hit the linoleum like a sack of sand. The emergency department doors slammed into lockdown, but not from inside. Someone had sealed them in from the outside. The lead man drew a weapon. Not a street gun, a suppressed Glock 19 with aftermarket sights. Professional hardware. Nobody moves. His English was accented, Central American, precise, educated. Nobody's a hero. We're here for one person. Give us Darnell Watkins, and everyone else walks out of here. 23 patients, 14 staff, 4 gunmen, and in the back of the ER, Gianna Ricci felt a box she'd kept sealed for 6 years crack open and spill its contents into her bloodstream like a drug she'd spent years learning not to need. She wasn't afraid. That was the part that scared her the most. The screaming lasted about 90 seconds. Then it stopped, not because people weren't scared anymore, but because the lead gunman fired his suppressed Glock into an empty crash cart, and the sound, even suppressed, was enough to turn 23 patients and 14 staff members into statues. "That was your free one," the man said. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. "The next one goes into a person. I don't care which person. Bring me Darnell Watkins." Dr. Okonkwo stepped forward, hands raised, voice steady. 15 years of Memphis trauma medicine had taught him how to be calm when everything wasn't. He's in surgery. 3rd floor OR. He's been there for 10 minutes. He's not accessible to any of us. The lead man, Marco, though none of them knew his name, yet considered this. His jaw worked. Once. Twice. Then he pulled out a phone, dialed a number, spoke in rapid Spanish. When he hung up, his expression hadn't changed. Then we wait. And so do all of you. Keisha Moore was standing 6 feet from Gianna when the lockdown happened. She was now pressed against the nurse's station, her hands shaking so hard the lanyard around her neck was clicking against the counter. She was 26 years old, and she was going to die in this ER. And she hadn't called her mother, and she hadn't told her boyfriend she was sorry about their fight, and she was going to die and she couldn't breathe. And Keisha. Gianna's voice cut through the spiral like a scalpel. Low, calm, utterly steady. "Look at me." Keisha looked. Gianna's brown eyes were different. Not scared, not angry. Focused. The way a surgeon's eyes looked mid-operation, like the entire world had narrowed to this room, this moment, this problem. "I need you to breathe. In through your nose, 4 counts. Out through your mouth, 4 counts. Can you do that for me?" Keisha nodded, breathed. The shaking didn't stop, but it slowed. "Good. Now, I need you to do something important. I need you to keep our patients stable. Can you do that?" "Gianna, there are men with guns." "I know. And there are patients in this ER who need their nurse. The lady in bed 3 is overdue for her blood pressure medication. The kid in bed 11 needs another nebulizer treatment. Can you handle that?" It was insane. It was clinical insanity worrying about blood pressure meds when 4 armed men were holding them hostage. But something about Gianna's tone, something about the absolute certainty in her voice, made it feel not just reasonable, but necessary. "Yeah," Keisha said. "Yeah, I can do that." "Then go." Keisha went. And as she moved toward bed 3 on legs that barely held her, She glanced back and saw something she wouldn't fully understand until hours later. Gianna wasn't looking at the patients anymore. She was looking at the gunmen. Specifically, she was looking at their positions, the angles between them, the blind spots in their coverage. She was looking at them the way a chess player looks at an opponent's formation. Gianna moved through the ER slowly, carefully, the picture of a nurse checking on patients. She stopped at each bed. She adjusted blankets. She checked monitors. She whispered reassurances. And with each stop, she repositioned a patient 6 inches here, a foot there, shifting them out of sight lines, behind structural columns, closer to hard cover. She was preparing the battle space. No one knew it but her. In the supply room, between the saline bags and the gauze, she allowed herself 60 seconds. She pressed her back against the shelving and closed her eyes and felt the ghost of another time press against her from the inside. A cargo container. Gulf of Mexico. The smell of human waste and terror. 43 bodies, some of them too small to be adults. 7 already dead. The rest begging for water in a language she didn't speak but understood perfectly. Not now. Not this. But the memory wouldn't stop. The container had been dark. Like this ER would be dark if the lights went out. And the sounds, the crying, the whimpering were the same sounds she could hear right now from behind the curtains. Different stakes. Same darkness. Same children crying. For one terrible moment, Gianna Ricci froze. Her hands, those precise, steady, never-failing hands, trembled. Her vision tunneled. Her breath caught in her chest like a bone in a throat. "You couldn't save them all," whispered the part of her brain that came alive at 3 a.m. 12 died. "You know all their names. You couldn't save them." She opened her eyes. She forced her hands flat against her thighs. She breathed 4 in, 4 out, the same pattern she'd given Keisha. "Not this time," she whispered to the empty room. "Not here. Not them." She opened her eyes. She walked back out into the ER, and she began, very quietly, to take stock of her weapons. Not firearms, she didn't have any, but she had 14 years of Coast Guard training, 8 years with the Maritime Security Response Team, and an encyclopedic knowledge of how to neutralize armed men in confined spaces using improvised tools. She had scalpels in the surgical tray, medication that could incapacitate in the right dosage, fire extinguishers that weighed 9 pounds and could crack a skull. And she had the one thing that had kept her alive through drug submarines and rigged cargo ships and hostage situations on the open sea. She had the element of surprise, because nobody, not one person in this room, on either side of the guns, had any idea what they were looking at when they looked at the quiet night nurse in the blue scrubs. The question was whether she could use it without getting everyone killed. 40 minutes into the siege, Gianna had a complete tactical picture. The lead man, calm, disciplined, ex-military, was positioned at the center of the department with clear sight lines to both corridors. This was Marco Vidal. Though she didn't know his name yet, she knew his type. Trained, professional, more dangerous than a street criminal, precisely because he wouldn't make emotional mistakes. Former Kaibilas, if she had to guess from the way he held his weapon close to the body, index finger along the rail, the particular stance drilled into Guatemalan special forces. The second man, bigger, American accent, aggressive energy, had positioned himself near the ambulance bay doors. Dante, ex-military too, but a different breed, the kind who got kicked out rather than promoted. He was the weak link. His discipline was performance. Underneath it, he was volatile. He paced. He checked his phone. He needed the bathroom. The other 2 brothers, she thought, from the way they communicated with glances, held the 2 remaining exits. Quiet, obedient, following orders. 4 men, 1 leader, 1 wild card, 2 followers. She'd trained for this. Not metaphorically, literally. MSRT's primary mission was exactly this. Close quarters combat in confined spaces against armed hostiles with civilians present. She'd done it on cargo ships. She'd done it on drug submarines. She'd done it on container vessels where one wrong move would detonate an IED and kill everyone aboard. This was a hospital. The geometry was different. The principle was the same, but she was alone. On a ship She'd had a team, an assault element, a security element, Overwatch. Here, she had Keisha's shaking hands and Dr. Okonkwo's steady voice, and Officer Webb, who was just now regaining consciousness on the floor near the ambulance bay, his hand moving instinctively toward a radio that wasn't there. Webb's eyes found hers across the department. She saw the question in them. What do we do? She held up one finger. Wait. Then she held her hand flat and moved it slowly downward. Stay low. Webb stared at her. He'd been a cop for 30 years. He recognized a tactical hand signal when he saw one. And in that moment, the thing he'd always felt about Gianna Ricci, that strange sense of professional recognition, clicked into focus like a rifle scope finding its target. He stayed low. He waited. Gianna returned to Dr. Okonkwo, who was treating a patient whose blood pressure medication was dangerously overdue. She leaned close, pretending to check a chart. Ray, when I tell you, I need you to get everyone behind the nurse's station. The counter is solid. It'll stop around. Okonkwo's hands didn't stop working. His face didn't change, but his eyes, those intelligent, experienced, everything twice eyes, locked onto hers with an intensity that said he understood exactly what she was proposing. What are you going to do? He whispered. My other job. A silence. Then, how long? Give me 4 minutes. He looked at her for a long moment. He saw the scar through her left eyebrow, the one she'd told him came from a stupid accident in the kitchen. He saw the way she held herself coiled, ready, alive in a way that had nothing to do with nursing and everything to do with something he was only now beginning to comprehend. Gianna, who are you? She almost smiled. Almost. Ask me again in 4 minutes. Dante, the volatile one. The weak link broke formation at 12:24 a.m. He needed the bathroom. Marco's jaw tightened, a breach of discipline, but he jerked his head toward the corridor. Dante moved. He didn't take backup. Gianna followed. She told Keisha she was checking on a patient in the hall. She picked up a fire extinguisher as she passed the wall mount. 9 pounds. Metal canister. She held it at her side like she was carrying a piece of equipment to restock a supply room. The corridor was 40 feet long. Fluorescent lights, humming. No cameras in this section. She'd known that since her first month at Memphis Regional, the same way she'd known where every exit was, where the breaker panels were, where the structural supports could stop a bullet. She'd told herself she cataloged these things out of habit. She'd been lying. She'd cataloged them because part of her had always known this day was coming. Dante was at the bathroom door when she turned the corner. He saw her, a nurse, small, 5'4", hands that looked too delicate for the fire extinguisher she was carrying. Get back to. She closed the distance in 3 steps. The fire extinguisher connected with his gun hand, first shattering 2 metacarpal bones and sending the suppressed Beretta skittering across the floor, then with his temple. The second strike was precise, calibrated, delivering exactly enough force to produce unconsciousness without causing a skull fracture. It was the kind of controlled violence that took years to learn and seconds to execute. Dante folded like a chair. 14 seconds. Start to finish. Gianna stood over him, breathing normally. Her heart rate elevated but controlled. She picked up his Beretta, checked the chamber, confirmed the suppressor was secure, tucked it into her waistband under her scrub top. Then she dragged him into the supply closet, zip-tied his wrists with a tourniquet improvised restraint, effective enough, and closed the door. When she walked back to the ER, she was carrying a fresh box of saline bags. Supply closet was a mess, she said to Keisha. I need you to lock it, and don't open it until the police arrive. Keisha frowned. Why? Just trust me. Something in Gianna's voice, something ancient and absolute, the voice of a senior chief petty officer who had commanded men and women in life-or-death operations for a decade, made Keisha lock the door without another question. 3 gunmen left, 1 suppressed pistol acquired, and somewhere in the ER, Officer Marcus Webb was watching Gianna Ricci, with the expression of a man who had just solved a puzzle he'd been working on for 4 years. Outside, Memphis was waking up to a nightmare. The 911 calls had started at 11:58 p.m., a nurse who'd managed to text from behind a curtain, a patient's family member who'd seen the lockdown from the parking lot, By 12:15 a.m., Memphis PD had the building surrounded. By 12:30, FBI was on site. Darnell Watkins, it turned out, was a federal witness under protection, a former logistics coordinator for a trafficking pipeline that ran from Honduras to Tennessee, the same pipeline that had generated the cargo ship interdiction in 2019, the same organization that had lost $47 million and 23 operatives because of a Coast Guard team. Special Agent Camille Foster, FBI, stood in the mobile command post and felt her stomach drop. "The witness is in surgery on the 3rd floor," her team leader said. "Or is secured. But the ER has 37 civilians and 4 gunmen. Los Fantasmas," Foster said. She knew the crew, the cartel's cleanup team. Professional, disciplined, ruthless. "We're staging HRT for breach, but the sightlines are bad. Any tactical entry will result in civilian casualties." Foster stared at the building's schematic, trying to find an angle that didn't exist. She'd spent 3 years protecting Darnell Watkins. She was not going to lose him or 37 innocent people because some cartel cleaner wanted to tie up loose ends. "Get me fiber optic cameras through the ventilation system," she said. "I want eyes inside that ER before we send anyone through those doors." Inside the ER, Gianna was running out of time. Marco had noticed Dante was gone. His expression didn't change. The man's face was a mask, but his movements became sharper, tighter. He spoke quietly to the brothers at the exits. Their hands moved closer to their weapons. "Where's the other one?" Marco said, scanning the department. His eyes found Gianna, passed over her. She was just a nurse, standing by a patient, checking a blood pressure cuff. Nothing to see. "Bathroom," someone offered. "He's been gone 15 minutes. Silence. Marco's jaw worked. He pulled out his phone and dialed. No answer. He dialed again. Nothing. Gianna felt the shift in the room the way a sailor feels a change in the wind. The professional calm was cracking. Marco was still disciplined, but discipline under duress was a different animal than discipline in control. Unpredictability rose with pressure, and pressure was rising now. She moved to Dr. Okonkwo. "Now, Ray, get everyone behind the counter. Tell them it's a precaution. Go." Okonkwo moved. Quietly, efficiently, he began herding patients and staff toward the nurses' station, murmuring about safety protocols, about staying low, about letting the police handle things. His voice was steady enough that people followed, and scared enough that they moved quickly. At the FBI command post, the fiber optic cameras came online. Foster leaned into the monitor. Grainy footage, green-tinted from the low-light lens, showed the interior of the ER. Hostages clustered behind the nurses' station. 3 gunmen, not 4. 3 positioned in a triangle formation. And 1 nurse, moving with purpose. Foster watched her. The nurse was small, dark-haired, wearing blue scrubs. She was carrying what looked like a Beretta tucked into her waistband. She was checking angles. She was using cover. She was moving through the ER with the fluid, deliberate efficiency of C. "Hold on," Foster said, leaning closer. "That's not a nurse. Ma'am, the way she's moving. Watch her clear that corner. She's slicing the pie. That's not civilian training. That's military CQC, close quarters combat." The HRT team leader looked at the screen. "Could be former law enforcement? No. That's a controlled pair stance. She's doing room clearing technique. Specific technique." Foster's mind was racing, flipping through mental files of joint operations, after-action reports, unit designations. "Get me Coast Guard Investigative Service on the phone." "Coast Guard? Just do it." She was already pulling up the commendation database on her laptop, cross-referencing Memphis nursing licenses. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. A name appeared. A photograph. A service record that read like a novel. Gianna Maria Ricci, Senior Chief Petty Officer. Maritime Security Response Team. Call sign. Stiletto. "Oh my God," Foster whispered. She was on the Prometheus. She was point on the submarine boarding. She's Stiletto. Inside the ER, Gianna had reached Keisha one more time. "I need you to do one more thing for me." Gianna, what is happening? In about 2 minutes, I need you to go to the breaker panel behind the supply room, the gray box on the wall. I need you to kill every light in this department. Keisha stared at her. You want me to turn off the lights while there are men with guns? That's insane. Keisha. Gianna's voice dropped. Not louder, lower, more absolute. The voice of Senior Chief Ricci addressing a subordinate who needed to trust the chain of command. I have spent a very long time training to fight in the dark. They haven't. When the lights go out, you get behind that counter and you stay there until I tell you it's over. Do you understand? Keisha's eyes were wide. Her lips trembled, but she nodded. 2 minutes, Gianna said. Count in your head, then throw the switch. She turned toward Marco's position. She pulled the Beretta from her waistband. She checked the magazine one final time. 2 minutes, 19 seconds of darkness, and then it would be over, one way or another. She thought of her mother on Staten Island, forgetting more every day. She thought of Container 7 and the 12 names she carried. She thought of Darnell Watkins, unconscious on an operating table 3 floors up, his testimony the only thing standing between a trafficking network and another generation of victims. She thought of Keisha, who was brave enough to shake and still do her job. She thought of nothing. She moved. I'm going to give you one chance. Gianna's voice came from behind the trauma bay partition, calm and conversational, the way someone might offer a colleague coffee. Marco spun toward it. Weapon up. But the voice had that particular quality of spatial displacement bouncing off the tile walls, impossible to pin. You put your weapons down. You keep your hands visible. Nobody else gets hurt. You have 8 seconds. Marco's face changed for the first time all night. Not fear confusion. This wasn't in the playbook. Hostages didn't negotiate. Nurses didn't issue countdowns. You're a nurse, he said. I was a lot of things before I was a nurse. A pause. Then, 8 seconds, Marco. 7. The use of his name hit him like a slap. Nobody here should have known his name. He'd told no one. His hand tightened on the Glock. He made a decision. He jerked his head at Tomas and Javier the brothers, and barked an order in Spanish. Find her. Kill her. 5. Tomas moved left. Javier moved right. Marco held position, weapon up, covering the center of the ER where the hostages huddled behind the nurse's station. His tactical mind was working. 3 against 1, converging from multiple angles. Even if this nurse was something more than she appeared, the math was simple. 4. He was wrong about the math. 3. Because the math assumed light. In a corner of the ER, Keisha Moore, 26 years old, 3 months on night shift, shaking so hard her teeth hurt, reached the breaker panel. She threw the switch. The emergency department went black. Not dim, not dark. Black. The kind of absolute darkness that exists inside cargo ships at 2 a.m. in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, where the smugglers cut the power before you breach and you learn to navigate by sound and touch, and the particular spatial memory that MSRT drills into its operators over thousands of hours of zero-light training. The screaming started immediately, patients, staff, the primal human response to sudden darkness in a place of violence. But the screaming served Gianna's purpose perfectly, because screaming is noise, and noise is cover. She moved. Tomas was at the eastern door. She knew his position because she'd been tracking his footsteps for 40 minutes, mapping his rhythm, learning the particular sound of his boots on the linoleum. She came in from his left, the blind side, even in light, and the engagement lasted 4 seconds. A controlled strike to the weapon hand, a knee to the thigh to drop his stance, and a precise chokehold that put him under without a sound louder than the scuffle of feet on tile. His weapon was in her hand before his body hit the ground. Javier heard his brother fall. He fired. 2 rounds, suppressed but not silent in the enclosed space, and both rounds hit a supply cabinet 3 feet from where Gianna had been half a second earlier. She'd moved the moment Tomas went down lateral displacement, the basic survival technique that kept you alive when someone shot at your last known position. She didn't fire back. Not yet. Javier was between her and the hostages, and a suppressed round could still punch through a body, and into a civilian. Instead, she closed the distance in the dark, navigating by the muzzle flash of his shots, and took him down with a technique that the MSRT hand-to-hand instructor called the piano a simultaneous strike to the gun hand and the jaw that played two notes of pain at once and produced immediate unconsciousness. 6 seconds. 2 down. Marco was alone. He knew it. She could hear it in his breathing, the particular rhythm of a trained operator who understood that the math had changed. He'd pulled back to the trauma bay, where the heavy equipment provided cover, and he'd gone quiet, disciplined, patient, waiting for her to come to him. This was the part she'd been afraid of. Street criminals panicked in the dark. They fired wildly, exposed themselves, made mistakes. But Marco Vidal was former Caibiles Guatemalan Special Forces, jungle warfare specialists, men who trained in conditions that would break most soldiers. He wouldn't panic. He would wait. He would listen. And when she came through that door, he would be ready. She came through anyway. The trauma bay was 10 by 12 feet. She knew every square inch, every rolling table, every IV pole, every corner of every piece of equipment. She'd worked in this room for 4 years. It was hers. She sliced the pie at the doorframe, the technique Agent Foster was watching on the fiber optic feed. The technique that had identified her as MSRT, exposing 1 degree of angle at a time, clearing the room in increments, never exposing more of her body than necessary. Marco was good. He'd positioned himself behind the crash cart, using its bulk as cover, his weapon at high ready. When she entered, he fired a disciplined double tap that missed her by the width of a scrub top, because she'd anticipated his position based on the only logical cover point in the room. She returned fire once. The round hit the crash cart. Not a miss, a deliberate shot to show him she knew where he was. Then she was on him. The hand-to-hand engagement lasted 11 seconds. It felt like 11 minutes. Marco was taller, heavier, and his Caibiles training surfaced like a second skin, close-quarters grappling techniques designed for jungle warfare, brutal and efficient. He caught her arm, twisted. She felt something in her forearm tear not bone, but close, and the pain was a white flash that threatened to lock her joints. She didn't let it. She used his grip against him, a redirection technique that MSRT borrowed from Navy SEAL combatives, using an opponent's force as a lever, and drove her elbow into the nerve cluster below his ear. He staggered. She followed with a knee strike that buckled his stance. He came back. A punch that caught her ribs and cracked one she felt it separate. The particular grinding sensation of fractured bone that she remembered from the Prometheus breach in 2017. She absorbed it, used the momentum of his follow-through to sweep his legs. He went down. She went with him. On the ground, in the dark, in a hospital trauma bay that smelled like antiseptic and blood, and the metallic tang of expended rounds. Gianna Maria Ricci, call sign Stiletto, Senior Chief Petty Officer, Maritime Security Response Team, applied a rear-naked choke with the precision of someone who'd practiced it 10,000 times and had used it for real more often than she wanted to remember. Marco fought it. Hard. His hands clawed at her forearm, opening the gash that would need 17 stitches. But the choke was locked. The blood flow to his brain was interrupted. And in the darkness, Gianna counted 5 seconds. 6, 7, until his body went limp, and his hands fell and his breathing continued, but his consciousness didn't. She held the choke for 2 more seconds. Not out of anger, out of certainty. Then she let go, and she sat on the floor of the trauma bay, her back against the wall, her ribs screaming, her forearm bleeding onto the linoleum, and she waited for the lights to come back on. 19 seconds, start to finish. When the ER flooded with fluorescent light again, the scene was this. 3 gunmen incapacitated in the main department, 1 unconscious in a supply closet, no hostage casualties, no civilian injuries, and a trauma nurse sitting against a wall in Trauma Bay 1, still holding a suppressed Beretta, bleeding quietly onto her own scrub pants. Dr. Raymond Okonkwo was the first to find her. He approached slowly, the way you approach someone who has just done something impossible. Gianna, she looked up at him. There was no mask anymore, no quiet night nurse, no careful separation between past and present, no locked box in the back of her mind. Just a woman who had done what she was trained to do, in a place she'd never expected to do it, for people she'd sworn to protect. "I'm going to need sutures," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands, for the first time in 6 years, were shaking. "And somebody should check on the patient in the supply closet." I didn't have time to be gentle. FBI hostage rescue team breached the doors of Memphis Regional Medical Center's emergency department at 12:51 a.m. and found exactly nothing to rescue. The hostages were unharmed. The gunmen were secured. The ER was, aside from some bullet holes in the cabinetry and a crashed cart that would never roll again, intact. Special Agent Camille Foster pushed past the tactical operators and walked straight to Trauma Bay 1, where a young nurse was crying silently while placing perfect sutures in her mentor's forearm. The work was clean, precise. Excellent. Keisha's hands, which had been shaking for an hour, were suddenly and completely still, as if the act of caring for the woman who had saved them all had given her something solid to hold on to. Foster stood in the doorway. She didn't flash her badge. She didn't ask questions. She looked at the small woman with the dark hair and the broken rib and the forearm that was going to scar. And she said the only thing that mattered. "Senior Chief Ricci. It's been a long time." Gianna looked up. Her eyes, those deep-set brown eyes that had counted exits and engagement angles and hostage positions all night, were tired. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with the shift and everything to do with the 6 years she'd spent pretending she was someone simpler than she was. "I'm not Senior Chief anything anymore." Foster stepped into the room. She spoke quietly, the way people speak in hospitals and churches. "I was CGIS before I went bureau. I worked with MSRT on the Prometheus operation. I've read your after-action reports. All of them." A pause. "Including Container 7. Gianna's jaw tightened. "Container 7. 43 souls. 31 survivors. 12 names she carried like stones in her pockets. Tonight you were MSRT," Foster said. "Whether you want to be or not." Silence. Then, "Tonight I was a nurse who ran out of better options." Foster didn't argue. She didn't need to. They both knew the truth, and the truth didn't require agreement to be real. In the ER, the aftermath was quiet in the way that only the aftermath of violence can be. Memphis PD took statements. Paramedics treated the gunmen's injuries because this was a hospital, and even the people who had threatened to kill everyone in it were still patients once they were unconscious. Gianna refused a gurney, refused the ER bed they offered, refused everything except the sutures Keisha was finishing and a cup of coffee from the nurse's station that was, impossibly, still warm. The staff looked at her differently now, not with suspicion or awe, with accuracy. They were seeing her clearly for the first time, and what they saw wasn't a stranger. It was the same woman they'd always known, with an additional dimension they hadn't been able to perceive until tonight made it visible. Dr. Okonkwo sat next to her in the break room while she waited to give her statement to the FBI. He didn't ask her to explain. He didn't ask her to justify. He sat next to her and said nothing, because he'd worked trauma medicine for 25 years and he understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is just be there while they shake. That was when she cried. Not during the siege, not during the fight, not during the 19 seconds of darkness that would eventually be reconstructed by the FBI tactical team as one of the most effective single-operator hostage rescues in domestic law enforcement history. She cried in the break room of Memphis Regional Medical Center, sitting next to a man she respected more than almost anyone in the world, while a vending machine hummed in the corner and the first light of a Thursday morning began to gray the windows. She cried for the 12 people she couldn't save on that cargo ship. She cried for the 37 people she had saved tonight. She cried because for 6 years she'd believed she had to choose between the warrior and the healer, and tonight she'd learned that they were never separate. They were the same hands, the same training, the same woman. Darnell Watkins survived surgery. His testimony proceeded on schedule. The trafficking network that had connected Honduras to Tennessee, the same network that had put 43 people in a cargo container in 2019, crumbled under the weight of his evidence and the FBI investigation that followed. But that wasn't the story. The story was what happened after. Memphis PD offered Gianna a position as a tactical medical consultant. The FBI suggested a return to federal service. The Coast Guard sent a letter inviting her to MSRT's training cadre as an instructor, a position that would have put her back in the world she'd left, wearing the uniform she'd folded away. She turned them all down. "I left that life for a reason," she told Agent Foster during a follow-up debrief. "What happened that night doesn't change the reason. It just proves I can handle both." She returned to work 3 weeks later, her arm still in a soft cast, her rib wrapped and aching when she took deep breaths. The night shift ER was waiting for her. Keisha, who had permanently transferred to nights, had made coffee. Dr. Okonkwo was at the attending station, reading a chart. Officer Webb, sporting a new taser scar and an absolutely unshakable loyalty to Gianna Ricci, was making his rounds. "Busy night ahead," Okonkwo said, not looking up. Gianna tied her hair back in the low bun she'd worn every shift for 4 years. She checked the whiteboard. She picked up her first chart. "Let's get to work," she said. The ER felt different now. Not quieter, not calmer, the same Memphis chaos, the same gunshot wounds and overdoses and chest pains and scared children. But the staff moved with a particular confidence on the nights Gianna worked, a certainty that whatever came through those doors, they had something most ERs didn't. They had a night nurse who counted exits before she counted patients. And now, everyone knew why. Some people run toward danger because they don't value their own lives. Others run toward it because they value other lives more than their own safety. Gianna Ricci wasn't fearless that night in Memphis. She was terrified of the dark, of the memories it carried, of the possibility that she'd lost a step in 6 years, of the near certainty that someone she'd sworn to protect might get hurt because of her choices. She was terrified, and she acted anyway, because when the shooting started, there was never a choice. There were only people who needed her. What she discovered sitting in that break room, bleeding onto the linoleum, listening to the dawn come in through windows, she'd spent all night defending, was something she'd spent 6 years trying to forget. The best version of herself wasn't the warrior or the healer. It was both. It had always been both. The hands that could save a life and the hands that could end a threat were the same hands. They'd always been the same hands. Before you go, let me say something real. Stories like Gianna Ricci's matter, because people like you are still willing to feel them. There are veterans watching this right now, nurses on break, quiet heroes who will never ask for recognition. If this story hit you, take 1 second and hit the like button. That's how we get these stories in front of the people who need them. Drop a comment and tell me which moment stayed with you. I read every single one. If you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe. We tell a new story every day, and the next one, you're not ready for it. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one. Stay kind, stay strong, and never underestimate the quiet ones.